Have you ever felt like you're living two lives? The one where everything looks fine, and the one behind your eyes, where you're falling apart quietly. You smile in meetings, but panic in silence. You tell your friends you're okay, but every night feels like a quiet war with yourself. And just when things start to go well, you pull the plug. You vanish, you break the thing you prayed for, not because you're broken, but because part of you is afraid it might not last, afraid that love will leave, that success will reveal you're not enough, that peace will make the pain louder. There's a part of you buried deep that remembers every time it wasn't safe to be seen, and now it hides. It sabotages, not to ruin you, but to protect you. There's something I learned, something that changed the way I see all of it. And maybe it's time I show you too. Rachel Morgan had a life most would envy, a cozy apartment in downtown Seattle, a job designing human-centered tech at a fast-growing firm, and friends who called her strong, capable, kind. But Rachel had a secret. She always left. Every time something good began to take root, a job promotion, a man who loved her, even moments of quiet joy, she found a way to disappear, not physically, emotionally, internally, like a tide pulling back before the storm. It was never obvious. She'd just stop replying, start rescheduling. She'd overwork until she was too tired to feel anything and tell herself, "It's not the right time. I'm not ready. Maybe later." But the truth, she didn't know what she was running from, or why she was always so exhausted from hiding, until one night, a text message she didn't answer turned into a breakup she didn't fight for. And as she stood in her kitchen, alone with dishes undone, she whispered aloud, "What the hell is wrong with me?" The silence that answered her was not empty, it was full, heavy, like a door waiting to open, a door she had locked long ago. What if she wasn't broken, but divided? What if part of her was protecting her from something she couldn't even name? And what if the war inside wasn't destruction, but a call to come home? Something had begun to shift. Not outside, nothing looked different, but inside. The ache had a shape now, and shapes can be traced, followed, even healed, but only if you dare to see them. What's the first time you remember disappearing, not physically, but emotionally? The moment your body stayed in the room but your soul took a step back. For Rachel, it was age 7, a school recital. She wore a purple dress with silver sequins, her favorite. She had practiced her line for days, one sentence in the school play, one spotlight moment. But when her voice cracked halfway through, the audience giggled. She saw her mother shift in her seat, embarrassed. Afterwards, in the car, her mom said, "You always try too hard. Just be quiet next time." Rachel didn't cry, she just stopped trying. That night, she laid in bed staring at the ceiling, repeating the words over and over. "Be quiet next time, be quiet next time." And something inside her folded, like a letter never sent. She didn't know it then. But that moment became a script, one she would follow for years. Every time she spoke too loudly, laughed too big, loved too freely, that old voice would echo, "You're too much." So she started shrinking, not all at once. Bit by bit, smile by smile, choice by choice. It wasn't that she lacked confidence, she had plenty, but only in silence, only when no one could challenge it. She became excellent at vanishing. Without leaving, at work she was the fixer, in friendships the listener, in relationships the ghost. People praised her independence, not knowing it was armor, not knowing it was fear, because when love came close, the script returned, "You're too much." And the little girl inside her hid behind the purple sequins. Have you ever had a moment like that? A memory so small you almost forgot it happened. But it shaped everything. If you do write it down, not to analyze, not to solve, just to see it. Because sometimes the first step to coming home to yourself is to find where you left and gently walk back. It started with a chair. A Monday morning meeting, Rachel sat across from her manager, arms crossed. The topic was small, an edit on a design layout, but something inside her snapped. "No," she said. "I already fixed that." Her voice was sharper than intended. The room went quiet, her manager blinked. Rachel felt the heat rise in her chest, and that old voice whisper, "You're too much." She smiled, apologized, shrunk. But later in the bathroom she stared at her reflection and mouthed the words. What was that? The flash of rage, the tight chest, the shaking hands. It didn't match the moment. The edit was minor. The critique was valid, so why did it feel like a threat? That night she fell into a rabbit hole, reading articles on triggers, trauma, the unconscious. And that's when she found it, Carl Jung, the shadow, a concept she'd heard before but never understood. The idea was simple and terrifying. Everything we reject goes underground. Our anger, our fear, our desire, our need to scream, to be held, to matter. It doesn't disappear, it waits. And from the dark it drives us, not with malice, but with memory. The shadow, Jung wrote, is not evil, it's exiled, a part of you that was taught you're unsafe, wrong, you don't belong, so it hides. Until one day it fights back. Rachel began to see it clearly. The rage in the meeting wasn't about her boss. It was 7-year-old Rachel, still wearing the purple sequins, screaming, "See me." Not to punish, to protect. Because the moment Rachel felt unseen, unheard, unvalued, the shadow stepped in. It didn't care about professionalism, it cared about survival. And suddenly, self-sabotage made sense, not as a flaw, but as a form of loyalty to the girl who once needed silence to feel safe. Have you ever felt that, like something inside you overreacted? But when you traced it back, it wasn't overreacting at all, it was remembering. Your shadow doesn't want to ruin you, it wants to be seen. And once you see it, you can begin the conversation. Rachel didn't know what to expect, she just knew something had to give. So she sat at her kitchen table, opened a notebook and wrote, "Dear Rage." Then paused, the pen hovered, her hand trembled. "How do you speak to the part of you you've spent a lifetime running from?" She breathed in and let it spill. "I'm sorry I've ignored you. I thought you were the enemy, but maybe you were the only one who stayed." She didn't think, she just wrote, angry lines, raw confessions, childlike phrases. "I'm scared, I'm tired of being strong. Why did no one ever protect me?" The more she wrote, the softer she felt, not weaker, just real. She signed it, RN. For the first time in years she cried. Not from pain, but from relief. She hadn't realized how loud the silence had become. That night she left the letter open on the table. And when she woke up, the world felt different, not brighter, not easier, but clearer. There was no magic, no instant healing, just space. A small space between reaction and awareness, between impulse and choice. And in that space Rachel met herself. The part of her that raged, because no one ever taught her how to grieve. The part that yelled because she was never allowed to weep. The part that pushed away love because once, love meant pain. It was still hard. She still flinched when someone touched her arm too long, still hesitated before expressing joy. Still waited for things to go wrong. But now she wrote letters to fear, to shame, to the girl in the purple dress. Sometimes one sentence, sometimes pages, not to fix them, to witness them. Because when no one else listens, your pen still can. Have you ever tried that, writing not from your head, but from your hurt? Try it, not perfectly, not poetically. Just honestly. You might find your shadow doesn't need to be silenced, it just needs a voice. It came back to a boy on a porch. Rachel was 9. The summer her parents almost divorced. The house was always loud, doors slammed, voices sharp, silence sharper. One night, after a particularly bitter argument, she slipped outside barefoot, sat on the wooden steps and curled into herself. A neighbor boy, maybe 11, walked by with his dog. He looked at her, paused, then sat down 3 steps below, didn't say anything. Just let his dog nuzzle her arm. They sat there for 20 minutes, no words, just quiet. Until he finally said, "My parents yell too. I just tell myself it's a movie. Like it's not about me, it's just noise." Rachel nodded, didn't speak. But something about that moment stuck. She didn't remember his name. But she remembered the porch, the smell of cedar. The way the silence didn't hurt that night. It became her blueprint. When things got loud, internally or externally, she'd shut down, make herself invisible, tell herself, "It's just a movie, it's not about me." And it worked for a while, until she started disappearing from herself. Because the shadow doesn't just form in trauma, it forms in how we survive it. Rachel didn't throw tantrums. She threw parts of herself away, the expressive one, the needy one, the loud one, the playful one, all sacrificed for peace. And the cost? Connection, presence, joy, not because she didn't want them, but because her nervous system equated visibility with danger. She didn't trust joy, didn't trust comfort, didn't trust love, because the moment things got too good, the script played again. "You're too much. Don't ruin this. Stay quiet." Wounded loyalty. A phrase she read once and couldn't unhear. The idea that we stay loyal not to people, but to the strategies that once kept us safe, even when they hurt us now, even when they cost us everything. Rachel began to see it clearly. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was training. Her withdrawal wasn't avoidance, it was protection. And that changed everything. Because if your shadow is a soldier, then maybe it doesn't need to be defeated. Maybe it needs to be disarmed with kindness, with memory, with moments like that boy on the porch. You may not remember their name, but you remember how it felt to be seen, without being fixed. That feeling can be given to yourself too. Rachel stood at the doorway of her apartment, keys in hand, heart racing for no apparent reason. The date had gone well, too well. He was kind, gentle, curious. He laughed at her jokes, asked about her dreams, held space for her silence. And that's what terrified her. She hadn't texted him back. It had been 3 days, the message still unread. Not because she wasn't interested, but because something inside had slammed shut. That night she poured a glass of wine, but didn't drink it. She sat on the floor of her bedroom and stared at the closet. It was just a closet, but in her mind it became something else. A locked room, not in her house, but in her body, her psyche, her past. She imagined walking through herself, hallways of memories, childhood laughter echoing like ghosts, and then a door, metal, cold, without a handle. She knew what was inside, she just didn't know how to face it, so she sat on the carpet and whispered, "I don't want to lose another good thing." No response, just her breath. And the quiet, she asked herself, "What am I afraid will happen if I let this in?" The answer came not as words, but as feeling, tight throat, heavy chest, the urge to flee. She grabbed her journal, wrote the question again. "What am I afraid will happen if I let someone love me?" The pen shook, and she wrote, "They'll see the real me, they'll leave. I'll need too much. I'll become that little girl again, and no one will stay." It wasn't logic, it was legacy. The beliefs formed not in her mind, but in her nervous system. Because when you grow up equating closeness with chaos, your body doesn't crave love. It craves safety. And love, no matter how pure, feels like risk. So you build a locked room. You store the good things there, the joy, the need, the softness, the hope. You think it's safer inside, but the truth is you can't breathe when you're split in two. Rachel didn't open the door that night, but she sat beside it for the first time, and that was enough. Because healing isn't always bursting through. Sometimes it's waiting with your hand on the wall and whispering, "I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving." It was a Tuesday afternoon. Rachel had taken the day off, not because she had plans, but because she couldn't pretend anymore. She sat on the couch, barefoot, hair undone, and stared at the ceiling like it held secrets. Then she did something new. She didn't journal, didn't distract, didn't analyze. She just said, "Okay, I'm listening," and waited. At first there was nothing, just the hum of the fridge, the soft buzz of her phone, ignored. Then came the flicker, a memory, not vivid, just a flicker, of sitting alone in the school bathroom after a girl called her weird. She was 8, trying to make friends. Tried too hard, talked too much. And for the first time she realized. She hated that girl, not the bully herself. The version of Rachel who tried, who wanted, who didn't know how to be cool. She called her cringe, too needy, too loud. So she buried her with smiles, with sarcasm, with success. But she never really left. Rachel closed her eyes and whispered to the silence, "You don't have to hide anymore." She felt foolish, but kept going. "I blamed you for every time I didn't belong, but maybe you were just trying to be loved." And suddenly tears, not a flood, just enough. She pictured that little girl, curly-haired, knees scabbed, eyes bright, and for the first time she didn't cringe. She softened, because maybe the shadow isn't a monster. Maybe it's a memory trapped in a loop waiting to be held. She imagined wrapping her arms around that version of herself. No fixing, no advice, just presence. And the girls smiled back, no longer scary, no longer strange, just returning. It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins, no epiphanies, just quiet. The kind of quiet that says, "I see you, I remember, you're safe." And in that space Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Whole, she whispered one last thing. "I don't need to outrun you anymore. We can walk together." Rachel didn't become a new person. She just became someone who didn't disappear anymore. It happened slowly. In the small moments, like answering a text even when her stomach flipped, like saying, "I need a minute" in a meeting instead of forcing a smile, like letting herself laugh loud and unfiltered on a second date. She started noticing when her shadow stirred, the prick of tension in her shoulders, the urge to shut down, the sudden voice whispering, "This is too good, don't trust it." And instead of obeying, she paused, placed a hand on her heart and said softly, "I hear you, but we're okay." The inner child didn't vanish, the fear didn't dissolve, but they stopped driving. Rachel called it integration, not the absence of fear, but the presence of self. She stopped labeling her reactions as wrong, stopped fighting the parts of her that overprotected. Instead, she asked, "What do you need right now?" Sometimes the answer was rest, sometimes it was silence, sometimes it was a walk with no destination. She stopped ghosting herself. That was the real shift, because sabotage doesn't start with others, it starts with self-abandonment. With that quiet moment when you say, "It's fine," but no, it's not, Rachel began to speak, not to the world first, to herself. She'd stand in the mirror and say, "I'm not too much, not a burden, not broken," not to convince, but to reconnect. She remembered something a therapist once told her: "You don't have to believe the words. You just have to say them, until the part of you that never heard them finally does." And that changed everything, because the shadow didn't vanish, it evolved from saboteur to guide, from threat to signal. She began to trust joy again, not blindly, but bravely. She no longer needed life to be perfect. She just needed it to be real, felt, honest. And in those honest moments she realized something. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of all your parts in one room with the door left open. It happened on a random Thursday. Rachel was at a coffee shop, her laptop open, her heart steady. Then she saw him, not her ex, not someone important, just a man she had once cared about, who disappeared without a word. And suddenly her breath caught, her shoulders tightened. The room felt smaller, old scripts whispered, "You're forgettable, you weren't enough." She closed the laptop, gripped her mug, thought about leaving. For a moment, the shadow stood tall, but this time Rachel didn't run. She didn't fake a smile, didn't pretend it didn't sting. She just stayed. Inside her chest, the panic still hummed, but she placed her hand over it and whispered silently, "I know this story, and I know it's old." The man never noticed her, never looked up, and yet that wasn't the point. The point was, she didn't abandon herself. Afterward, she walked to her car, sat behind the wheel and cried, not from sadness, but from grace. Because growth isn't always visible, it's felt. It's the moment you don't collapse, even when the floor still creaks. It's when your voice shakes, but you still speak. Rachel realized something that day: healing isn't linear, it spirals, it circles back, not to punish you, but to test your softness. The old you will visit, the pain will knock, the urge to disappear will return. But now you have a choice: to pause, to listen, to stay, not perfectly, but consciously. That is the work. That is the gift, not being healed, being whole. Rachel wasn't free from pain. She was free to feel it without drowning. And that made all the difference. So if today you find yourself slipping, regressing, wondering if you failed, remember this: falling isn't failure. Not when you fall forward, not when you land in your own arms. Rachel stood at the edge of the pier, hands tucked in her coat pockets, watching the late autumn sky blur into the bay. Next to her was someone new, someone gentle, someone who didn't try to fix her silence, just waited inside it. She had told him about her past, not all at once, but piece by piece, about the girl in the purple dress, the rage in the meeting room, the letters, the locked door. And instead of stepping back, he stepped closer. He didn't say, "That's a lot." He said, "Thank you for trusting me." And Rachel didn't flinch, not because the fear was gone, but because she knew where it lived. And she no longer feared its voice. She had become someone who could be held. Because she had learned how to hold herself, she smiled not just at him, but at everything that had brought her here, every time she vanished. Every panic, every ache, every note she wrote in the dark, none of it was wasted, none of it broken, only unfinished. Until now. And maybe she wasn't finished either, but she was finally found. The parts of her that once sabotaged everything, they didn't disappear, they transformed. From monsters under the bed to messengers at the door. From resistance to rhythm. Because when you stop fighting yourself, you make room for someone else to stay. And maybe that's the quietest revolution: not loving perfectly, but loving honestly, not erasing your past, but letting it sit beside you without shame. So if this story has touched something in you, if there's a part of you whispering, "I'm tired of running," maybe today is your moment too, not to leap, not to shout, just to pause and say, "I'm here and I'm listening." If that's you, drop a comment below: "I'm ready to stop running." You're not alone, and this is just the beginning.